Just give me a minute. I think the laptop is hanging at the moment. I'll just try to put it into the full view mode.
Okay, ma'am.
Can you see the screen now? Are you able to see the screen?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Oh, you can't see the screen at all, is it?
No, it's visible.
It's visible. Okay, fine. Because I am trying to get into the full view mode. Just give me a minute.
കാണാമോ അവിടെ ഇവിടെ കാണാമോ
I think now the full screen is visible, I hope.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Am I audible? All right. Shall I start then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. So welcome to the world of children's literature. I'll be taking you into the world of literature and showing you a bit of the picture book world as well. I'd like to jog you out of your sleepy state this time in the afternoon with a question. Is children's literature a subject you have taught or studied in college? Now, I know there are many students here. You may have studied it. Some of us as teachers may have taught it, but not all. So this is the first question I have for you. Are you familiar with it as a paper? Has it been on your syllabus in colleges and universities? If no, supposing now you don't have it, you've never done it as a student, you're not familiar with it as a teacher, why do you think it has not been included in the syllabus? If you do have it, then when did it come onto the syllabus? Do you have any idea? Was it 2 years back? Was it 5 years back? Was it 10 years back? Or was it 40 years back? The question now that I'm asking you pertains to your answers. If you never had children's literature in college or you never taught it, is it because it's a marginalized area of study? Then again, if you have taught it or if you have studied it, has it been in the recent past that it has been introduced in the syllabi across colleges and universities where you work or where you study? And this brings us to the term itself, children's literature. In connection with the question that I put forward in the last slide, if you look at the term children's literature, do you think that children's literature is of the children, that is portraying children as protagonists, as characters? Is it for the children? That is, children are the target readers, the target audience, and is it by the children? Is it written by the children? Just as you have papers like women's writing, you have papers like post-colonial literatures, where the writers figure in the label. Is it so when it comes to children's literature? Now, I have put up something which gives you a fairly correct answer. You can't say that children's literature is literature solely of the children. You may have read animal fables, you may have read fantastic stories where children don't figure, but mostly always there are children in children's literature. Again, if you look at children as the target audience, the reader, it is almost always for the child, but then again, it is not necessarily targeted towards the child. So you have authors writing generally for the adult, for the child. The child picks up the book and makes it its own, and thereby brings it into under the label of children's literature. But one thing we can be certain of, mostly all of us, if we look back into the past, into our childhood, would have not really read anything written by children. So we come to a few paradoxes. Although we call it children's literature, it is adults who write books for children. And with adults come that baggage of ideology, which adults carry consciously, unconsciously, and decide that children are inferior to them. Children need to be molded. Children need to be given what they need to grow up into future citizens of the world. Not necessarily what they enjoy, not necessarily what they really want. What they want may be pure entertainment, but adults decide to be didactic. They decide to moralize. They decide to give them infotainment, that is, a clever packaging of information inside entertainment. Paradox 2, although we call it children's literature, children, if you notice here, figure at the bottom of the ladder. The major stakeholders still seem to be adults. They are the publishers, they are the writers, they are the illustrators, and they see teachers, librarians who actually buy those books for children and who decide what is good for the child. Naturally, the publishers and writers and illustrators will cater to giving these sets of adults what the child needs and what doesn't give or don't give what the child wants. Paradox 3. This has already been mentioned earlier. So literature written by adults is called or labeled children's literature. Literature sometimes written by adults, not so much for children, but which children do read, is also termed children's literature. So you have Robinson Crusoe, not really meant or written for children. You have Huckleberry Finn, again, not really written for children, but it's labeled children's literature today. So a critic in children's literature by the name of Mara Gubar argues that it is very strange that literature actually written by children independently or in collaboration with adults is not really labeled as children's literature or considered as children's literature. We come to paradox 4. The child in the story is not the real child. It's a personal and social construct of the author. Now, the author bases a portrayal of the child in the story going back to her or his own childhood, his or her experiences as a child, his or her experiences probably as a parent with children. Also, it is based on the social construct. That is, what does society think of the child? The construct of the child in society is internalized by the writer of these tales. So, paradoxically, the child in the story is not necessarily the real child out there. Paradox 5. The target reader is again not the real child. So the author, the publisher, the illustrator always have a child in mind. But this child need not necessarily be the real child. They are in danger of essentializing here. They imagine a child reader, and in fact, they imagine all child readers to be, the same. In fact, if you look at a child and the responses that a child makes towards a book, the same child may respond to the same book differently every time the child picks it up. And we come back now to the question I asked earlier. Is children's literature then a marginalized subject. Now, we already know that it is meant for children. It is written for children. It portrays children, but it is written by adults. Then why is it still marginalized? So it is true that we take a condescending attitude, no matter which culture, which age we belong to, we take a condescending attitude towards children's books. Now, Peter Hunt has something to say. Is it because, like the traditional family, the conventional literary system is also male dominated? So you have adult male literature right at the top. Somewhere way down the ladder, you have women's literature. And then right at the bottom of the heap, you have children's literature. Now, we know that this is literature targeted towards children. But Peter Hunt also points out a second very important fact. It is written mostly by women. Now, it is but natural that women weave stories, recite, narrate stories to children as mothers, as grandmothers, as teachers, as librarians. So they are very familiar with what children would like to hear in the stories that they orally narrate. And it is not surprising that some of the best publishers, the writers, the illustrators we have in children's literature today are women. Is that also why this subject has been marginalized? We now come to another question. So are children different from adults? Do we look down on them? Do we think they are the inferior, specimens? They are the dumbed down version. They have smaller brains than adults have? Is that why we look at them as different? Or do we look at them as different at all? Now, the surprising fact is perceptions change age to age, culture to culture. Society has been looking at the child differently at different times. Just to give you an example, in Victorian England, now Victorian England was the time when children's literature actually rose into its own because Victorian parents indulged the child. They idealized the child. They were brought up or influenced by romantic notions, by the fact that the child is different, the child is innocent, the child is wiser than the adult. And therefore the child or the whims of the child were pandered to through books specially meant for them. So in Victorian England, they considered the child different from the adult, but they looked up to the child, not looked down on them. In India, on the other hand, and in England way back in the past, the child was treated on par with the adult. So you have the child and the parent sitting together under the neem tree, probably listening to the same story. The story may have coarse humor, it may have sexual innuendos, but the child was permitted to listen to them because the child was not considered different from the adult. The child was considered a mini adult. Peter Hunt is a critic from our times, and his perception may be on par with our perception of whether children are different or not different from adults. He says that children are not really different from adults. It's not because, they are wiser or less wiser or more wiser, but merely, if at all there's a difference, it's because they are less experienced. By experience, he probably is touching on the fact that children have a limited vocabulary. So in terms of language, they are less experienced. In terms of life itself, they are less experienced. So that is probably the only difference he would find between an adult and a child. So then, when we come to the subject of children's literature, do we actually think that it is different from literature for adults? Is it a dumbed down version? Is it a simplified version? Is that why we don't place it in the traditional literary system, in colleges, in universities? Why do we do so? Now, Natalie Babbitt actually points out that if at all children's literature is different from adult literature, it is only because it has more elements in it than adult literature has. To point out a few things that she has to say, Natalie Babbitt says that along with the emotions that you would find in adult literature, say for instance love or anger or jealousy, children's literature seems to have that added element of joy. And she says, I don't mean the sappy, happily ever after kind of an ending, but that note of optimism, which you would find in every children's book. Now, this note of optimism has been consciously kept there by the adult writer who believes that every child has the potential within to turn into whatever the child dreams of or desires or wants to be in future. So why crush that hope? Why crush that dream? Therefore, add in the note of optimism into children's books. She says, yes. Is it different? If it is different, then it is only because sex is absent in children's literature. Children are not interested in sex at the age that they are in. Their interest is more pertaining to food. And if you notice, if you go back to the books you've read as children, food takes up an enormous amount of space in the books that we have read as children. If it is different, again, it may be so because it is less violent. Now, I may not agree to that now. Currently, the adolescent reads very violent books, very dark books, and even fairy tales, for that matter, contain a whole lot of violence. So in that sense, they are on par with adult literature. So is it different? Yes, it is different, she says, in that it has a bigger font. Is it because children are blind? No, children have better vision than adults. But she says children are more demanding as readers. They demand a bigger font. They demand an action-oriented plot. They demand a crisp style. So just to make you think of the way adults read a book. Now, supposing you're given a book and you have 25 pages of description in it, you will still plod along and hope for the best at the end of it all. Whereas a child would read probably the first 2 lines and throw the book. Children are demanding readers. So can anyone write for children? Do you think it is easy to write for children going by all that we have seen? Not really. So you cannot really write down, dumb it down, simplify, put in a few fairies, a few witches, a happily ever after, once upon a time, and their children love it. No, you can't do that. You have to write up, says E.B. White, the author of Stuart Little. He says you have to write up, not down, because children are demanding. And he gives a whole list of adjectives to show how demanding they can be. He also says that writers purposely make sure that they put in only simple words. He says, this bores a child. Why don't you put in a difficult word? This emasculates the prose, he says. If the entire thing is too simple, it emasculates. And here he's actually giving us an example of putting and throwing in a big word. And I suspect bores the reader. Children are game for anything. Now let me point out to you that if you ask a child, which is the longest word in the dictionary, it is children who remember that it is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, much more than an adult would remember it. And now we come to the question which probably is in every research scholar's mind. Why would I want to study children's literature? Is it as important as, say, mainstream literature, adult literature, women's writing, post-colonial studies? Why should we study it? Okay, so the first point I have for you is that it's a very experimental genre. It's right out there. It leads in experimentation, in innovation. But more than that, it also becomes a repository for the old. It preserves fairy tales, say for instance, or folk tales, which has been lost to the adult world of literature. Adult literature has forgotten these subgenres, but they still retain in children's literature. To give you an example of how new genres are created in children's literature, Kimberly Reynolds points out magical realism first came into children's literature but was not appreciated, not acknowledged, not recognized until it came probably 30 years later into the art world, and the adults took it up and acknowledged it. It challenges the norm. So along with experimentation, you have a challenging of conventions, whether it is literary conventions, artistic conventions, aesthetic conventions, visual conventions, every kind of convention, even to do with the design of a book, it plays with conventions. It also challenges thinking. Yeah, the socio-cultural constructs that we have in society, the dominant ideologies we have in society, the stereotypes in society are all challenged and questioned. consciously many a time by these authors in children's books. And therefore, all this makes it truly transformative. The child whose mind is young and unformed grows to shape her or his attitude from the books that the child reads. So the child's books may offer alternative visions of the world. It may encourage the child to ask the question which actually naturally comes to the child. Why? Why are things as they are? Why can't they be different? And this brings us to the most important point. Why we should be studying children's literature is because as adults, our attitudes are shaped by what we have read as children. And this is what Kimberly Reynolds points out. If we are interested in understanding how our society works, where young people get their attitudes about issues such as sex, gender, violence, government, and war, it behoves us to look at what is being read. So I now come to a list, but not a complete list. I'm sure there'll be many more to add, but these are some of the subgenres of children's literature. And if you notice, there is the old side by side with the new. So you have fairy tales, you have folk tales, you have animal fables, nonsense verse and nursery rhymes still there. Along with it, you have horror. Now, horror was generally considered a taboo topic, like sex, like death, like loss, like grief, but horror has found its way now into children's literature. The graphic novel, it's there in adult literature, it's already there in children's literature. Mystery and adventure, all of us are familiar with, I think, at least my generation, with Enid Blyton novels, which are full of mystery and adventure. The comic book, Amar Chitra Katha, was what we grew up with. I'm not very sure what the young students are reading today, but you have so many more comic books, Marvel comics, for instance, which have become a rage as movies. You have school stories, and Harry Potter, for instance, is a mix of so many different subgenres that you see here. You have the picture book doing very well in India at the moment, and I will be talking more about it a little later. You have the journal. Now, let me point out to you that these subgenres like the journal, the picture book, the comic book, the graphic novel can be classified as composite text. That is, they hold both the verbal and the visual, picture and written text. And this is the world that we are living in today. We are living in a visual world. Right now, you're looking at your computer screen. You have the internet, you have the TV, you have the phone, you have billboards, and all of them have a different sort of reading that is required that these composite texts actually teach the child to do. So this is not all, it's not a complete list, but just to give you an idea about how many different kinds of subgenres children's literature actually includes. For those who are into research, these are some of the approaches, especially for the Department of English Language and Literature to look at. So when I looked at Indian picture books, I looked at it through the lens of post-colonialism and post-modernism. But let me tell you, eventually, when I realized the vast range of the different topics that I was covering, the different kinds of books that we have today in India in the form of picture books, I, in fact, ended up touching on and reading up on several of the other isms written here. So eco-criticism, for instance, new historicism, disability studies, cultural studies, gender studies. Now, my students take up gender studies in a big way. They are interested in how, the LGBTQ find representation in, say, for instance, picture books. Child-oriented criticism is very important for a subject like children's literature, but let me tell you again that there is a lot of difficulty faced by critics to gauge the responses of the reader, because like I said, you can't systematically put down the responses of a child. The last one, if in case it's not visible, is comparative children's literature. Now let me move on to the subgenre that I actually looked at in my PhD thesis, and I come to, in fact, I show in front of you 3 very important publishers in India. They're doing very well internationally. They are acknowledged, I think, more abroad than in India, in fact. And you have here, in fact, the one on the left is Tara, the one in the center is Tulika, and the one on the right is Karadi Tales. All of them are based in Chennai. And let me just take you through the uniqueness of each. Now, Tulika, for instance, has come out with a whole lot of books in not just English, but in 9 different languages. So you have Malayalam, you have Hindi, you have Marathi, you have Gujarati, and so on. More than that, they also have come out with bilingual books. That is, either the book would be printed in English and Hindi side by side, or English and Tamil side by side, or Hindi and Telugu side by side. So no matter which language the child is well versed in, the child gets to understand and know another language within the same book. If you look at Tara, now Tara specializes or rather focuses a lot on Indian arts, more so on women's art, whereas Karadi Tales was the first to come out with audio accompaniments to the tale, and the audio accompaniments were usually the voices of famous actors like Nasiruddin Shah. So this is just an introduction to some of the picture book publishers in India. But before we move on to any books in particular, I'd like you to focus on the term picture books. Now, I have consciously used this term without a gap here between the words picture and books. And let me explain why. Now, critics have argued about it, and what they have come to is a sort of consensus. So when you use it without the gap, you are trying to imply that there's a story within the picture book. And why do you call it a picture book? Because almost every page will have a picture there. It may or may not have written text, but it will definitely have a picture there. So how is it different from your illustrated book then? And this is a definition given by Kristen Holberg. She says, unlike an illustrated book where supposing now you have text with pictures, you can remove the pictures, the text still makes total sense. But in a picture book, they are mutually dependent. Word and image are an inseparable entity, so much so that only together do they convey a message. You take one out and the entire meaning goes for a toss. David Lewis, in fact, calls it mutual interanimation. That is, the words change the pictures and the pictures change the words. And what you get is altogether a different product. So you can never study the words alone. Supposing now as students of English literature, we only look at the written text. Or as students of fine arts, we only look at the pictures. We lose out on the entirety of meaning that the picture book actually, produces or creates. This brings me to another very important aspect of picture books, and that is the relationship that exists between word and image. Remember, it's a composite text made up of words and images. Now, critics like Maria Nikolaeva and Carol Scott have tried to label picture books as symmetrical, that is, picture and text actually echo each other, or expanding, enhancing, or complementary, they fill in each other's gaps, or counterpointing, where they run at counterpoint, pictures and text run at counterpoint, building up irony or satire, or synectic, where there are independent narratives, especially when it comes to visual narratives. There may be a main narrative, there may be a running story, and we'll see that when we come to a picture book that I am going to show you. But on the other hand, there are critics like David Lewis who say that it's wrong to label an entire book as symmetrical or complementary or whatever, because every double page spread may have a different relationship between word and image. This brings us to the uniqueness of picture books. So, like I mentioned earlier, it is unique in that it's a composite text. It has a combination of 2 levels of communication, the visual and the verbal. More importantly, it has a dual audience. Now remember, a picture book is read by a young child and usually read too by an adult, whether it is a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, and so on. So you would have a dual audience who would generate multiple meanings in the process in the ritual of reading the book. Now, many authors are conscious of this dual audience, and what they do is they actually direct their address to both, and that's called double address. That is, the adult also has his or her share of the fun in the ritual of reading, because there are certain things that escape the child but is there consciously put there by the author for the adult. Coming back to the relevance of picture books, and this is, you could even say it is the relevance of children's literature, all books in general, that especially the composite text like the picture book and the graphic novel and the comic books, they hone multiple literacy skills. So if as adults we feel that we have to give them what they need, we have to hone the skills of the children, the ways in which they can read text, then picture books do a whole lot of stuff. They hone verbal skills, verbal literacy skills, visual, cognitive, affective, multimodal, and transcultural, and these are just a few. They also build on the sense of self. Now, especially in colonized countries like ours, where we have only read Enid Blyton books, we don't really relate to the child in the book as much as we would. Say, for instance, a child today takes up an Indian picture book and sees herself or himself there, mirrored there, and relates to the child more. Then that sense of self grows. Also, books can heighten the sense of awareness, a sense of empathy that a child can have for others who may be different from them, for others who may have gone through what they have not gone through. Similarly, the child is also made aware of the environment, nature, the creatures living in the environment. And in these terms, it is truly transformational because the child is made to see new world views. Why? Because you are questioning socio-cultural constructs, you are challenging stereotypes, you are, locking horns with dominant ideologies, and thereby promoting new world views and new attitudes, new ways of thinking, and new ways of reading for the child. This brings me to just, to show you just one picture book, and I'm going to show you the importance that the relationship has between written text and the pictures in the book. But let me start with the peritext, because let me tell you that when we study a picture book, we study the peritext as well. And here you have the front cover and the back cover. And if you open the book out, you can have a look at both the front and the back cover as I have placed it. And what you see actually gives the reader a clue to what the story contains. The title, of course, is Where's That Cat? But then if you're saying, where's that cat? The cat is very much visible on the front cover. But if you look at the back cover, the cat seems to have disappeared. Now, the story is all to do with Minnie, who has a pet cat, and the pet cat's name is Puni, which is the generic name in Tamil for cat. So Minnie is in search of a cat. She's come back from school. She's asked her mom where the cat is, but the mom doesn't know. So she starts alone searching for the cat on the streets. And we presume it is somewhere in Tamil Nadu because there's this board that you can see on the auto, rickshaw, which has the TN code on it. Now, I'd like you to notice a few things on this page. And remember, children are more observant than us. So as research scholars, we have to observe as well as children do these picture books. So if you notice, although Minnie has lost her cat, the reader can see the cat. The cat seems to be chasing a couple of crows. The parrot lady, usually associated with astrology and, hopping back into the past, it's a very traditional way of, telling the future, predicting the future. On the other hand, we have here tradition going hand in hand with modernity. You have the poster, regarding a sale. And remember, this is a materialistic world. And in India, we all run to sales the minute we see there's one happening in a certain shop. So the materialistic, a culture comes through in the posters that you see on the roads. So too, the caricatured old politician, speaks. There are many layers of meaning. The adult actually gets to read and enjoy the satire here of the cow chewing the poster of a rather old politician who is, campaigning for election. So this is the first page. If you notice, the cow seems to be rather human in the expression that it's portraying towards poor Minnie who has lost her cat. Here too, you see the cat, but now things have changed. The cat is not chasing the crow. The crow, in fact, is chasing the cat. This is what I was mentioning about the auto rickshaw. The man cleaning the auto rickshaw. The TN board is very visible here. So too, the dress that is worn by the man seems to suggest it is somewhere in South India. Here we know specifically it must be Tamil Nadu. The lady in rather informal attire here buying fruits from the fruit vendor is another very familiar scene on the streets of Tamil Nadu, on Indian streets generally. So here we have again Minnie continuing to ask various people where her pony is or whether they've seen Puni. Here again you see Puni is here. A dog has joined the fun. The dog becomes the audience to the crow chasing the cat. The Minnie is again on the road, so the teacher ma'am says, come on up onto the pavement. This is also very common in India, of walking on the roads instead of on the pavement. But here the teacher seems really concerned. Now we come to the page, which is rather crucial for the child reader. Now, if you notice, until now, it was only Minnie who portrayed her anxiety, her worry, her sense of loss and grief for the missing pony. But here, the reader is thrown across the road. From a distance, through clouds of pollution and smog, the reader realizes that the reader too has lost sight of Puni. There is no Puni anywhere on this page. So the sense of anxiety that is there in Minnie is now mounting in the child reader as well. Now what happens is this builds a sense of empathy for the child within the book. Let me bring to your notice. This is again an example of double address where the adult sees the humor, and this is probably satirizing the colonial hangover we have still in India. We call a shop's name by English aristocracy, echoes of English aristocracy is there, Lord and Taylors. We try to use the English language, the colonizer's language, even if we are not very familiar with the spelling. So this is called the intra-iconic text, that is written text found within pictures within a picture book. And this makes for a lot of humor. It becomes a source of humor, not just for children, may not be even for children, but for adults reading the books. Here you find towards the end of the story, I have just selected a few pages. Again, let me tell you that these texts can be polyphonic. So in India now, we, especially in towns and cities, we use what is called Hinglish or Tanglish or Manglish. So we mix up English with the language that we use here. So if you notice this billboard, it says fresh pani. Also, the sense of oneness, the sense of community we have, the sense of kinship we actually display in Indian villages, even more so than Indian towns and cities, is displayed here. Everyone has stopped doing what they were continuing to do on the streets and have joined Minnie in her search for Puni. They all sympathize, they all empathize with her, and they follow her back home. So we've seen now the running story, just as we have the running story of the cat and the crows, we have the running story of the cow chewing up the the politician's poster. So here you have the cow looking on and most of the poster is gone. And now we see even the flower lady, or rather the parrot lady and the cow, the teacher ma'am, the children all have followed Minnie back home. Her mother also says something that makes Minnie happy. And we see on the last page that Minnie has found her Puni. Now I'd like to bring to your notice another aspect of when we talk about peritexts. we also have something called the end papers in picture books. And the end paper here you see is blank, it's just a splash of color. But in many other picture books, you have, little doodles, little, it could be even a caricatured version. It could be a takeoff on the story in the main narrative. So end papers also contribute to the story. So we must not avoid looking at the end papers in our study of picture books too. Now let me just slowly wind up by showing you the wide variety of picture books that we have. Most of the books that I'm showing you are from India, are from these three publishers that I already spoke about. These books break design, conventions of design. If you notice, this is shaped like the Rajasthani storyteller's box, the cupboard. It in fact also mentions families which are different, like same-sex parents, the single mother family, and so on. So a very sensitive issue is touched upon for the young child in a book like this. This book too, Knock Knock, is actually placed in a box. It opens up into a multi-storied building full of surreal scenarios, and it again makes the reader conscious of the construction, the fabrication of fiction. So the child is physically constructing the story page by page in unraveling this particular book. On the other hand, round and round books, I've already mentioned that picture books can be wordless. Now, these are a set of 3 wordless picture books. The surprising thing is, these wordless picture books simply have 3 pages each. And they are rather stiff cardboard pages, which you can place on a table. You can start on any page and end on any page, because there is no starting and there is no ending. There is no beginning, there is no ending, there is no title. So the child is free to be the active reader and imagine the story that is being narrated in the text. Moving on. Now, I'd like to add one more before I forget. There is this book which can be placed here, which has recently come out and written by Zai Whitaker. It's called Cyrus the Virus. It's about the virus, and it allows the child today coping with this strange scenario that we are faced with today, the very scary scenario that we are going through. For a child, it is even more scary. So a book like Cyrus the Virus becomes a coping narrative for a child going through a similar situation. So Kanna Panna, for instance, is about a very positive portrayal about a visually challenged child who actually leads so-called, abled people, his family members, who can see through a dark spot. And it's a very positive portrayal of a visually challenged child. My Friend the Sea, again, touches on a taboo topic. It talks about death, it talks about loss, and it talks about the tsunami which came where, it's there in our minds, in our memories, it's in the recent past. But at the same time, it ends on an optimistic note, because it says, my friend the sea, Kadalamma will always be the mother. The sea will always be the mother to the fisher folk. No matter if there is a little bit of destruction, there is loss, there is death, but they still come through and look at the sea for support. The sea becomes always is the nurturer. Lonely King and Queen actually touches on another sensitive topic for an Indian audience, both the child and the adult, and that is adoption. You also have books touching on the marginalized. Now, let me tell you that the target audience for picture books, for children's literature, is generally the middle class child. And what is portrayed in books for the middle class child is another middle class child. So it is surprising that our books are going, further in portraying marginalized sections of society. So you have here Moina, the tribal girl. Here you have Punni, the flower seller, and here you have the voiceless tiger on the brink of extinction. And there is this very strong environmental message that is conveyed through tiger on a tree. Again, I don't think you can see what I've written below. These books are suffused with humor. They can be satirical, and many books for children have a lot of humor, because Adults know that children enjoy humor even more than adults. In fact, this book, Excuses, actually satirizes adult, parenting, disciplining by adults. Whereas when I grew up, actually challenges constructs like success. We are always constantly asking the child, what do you want to be when you grow up? As though success is based on marks, is based on the money that they get, and so on. So it challenges the constructs that adults have internalized already in society. When Ali became Bajrang Bali is again a satire and again talks about how man is foolish enough to destroy nature while claiming to worship Hanuman. In this case, it is Mr. Moochwala who decides who is a devotee of Hanuman, but at the same time he cuts down all the trees on which all the monkeys and the various creatures of the forest have made their homes. We can again get a window into the culture of the nation, culture of the people, and children can relate to their own culture. Also, children can know about somebody else's culture through books like these. So it could be on food, it could be a worldview, it could be a polyphonic book like The Runaway Peppercorn, where the sports commentary register makes you aware of the fact, in the main narrative, makes you aware of the fact that it's a very competitive world that we live in. And in fact, the child who's always the underdog will support the little peppercorn who manages to escape from the clutches of the old lady. Again, you have here folk, tales, but there is this subversion of folk tales also that is found. It's not a blind copying of folk tales as it was in the past, but folk tales that are remodified in order to suit the present context. We also have, this is what I was trying to mention earlier, and what students today, in fact, in my college are very interested in, doing research on this subject, where norms are questioned. So you have same-sex parents in Heather Has Two Mommies. You have the anthropomized version of same-sex parents in Tango Makes Three. You have transgender identity. There's this girl trapped in the body of a boy, and she wants to wear, and she likes to wear dresses, she likes to wear frocks. So these are sensitive, very sensitive issues, which are equally sensitively portrayed in books for children. Let me bring to your notice that all these three are not really from India. So maybe India has a long way to go when it comes to, LGBTQ issues, portraying them in books for children. I have deliberately left this slide empty of books to highlight the fact that what we need today in the world are tactile books, not for the child who just feels it and who looks at the printed written text and moves on, but for the visually challenged. They hardly get to see books written in Braille and pictures that are tactile so that they stand out, they can be felt, and the experience that any child has from owning a picture book and experiencing the picture book for herself or himself is lost out to the visually challenged. Let me point out that there are NGOs like, Chetana Trust in Chennai, who are doing a lot to promote tactile books, to create tactile books, and our students, in fact, have done a lot. If I have time, I can show you a video of some of the books they have done, but otherwise, there is a dearth of tactile books for the visually challenged, probably because it may not be a commercially viable, thing for publishers today. Let me just end with taking you through some of the books that can be considered the very important texts in this area. So you have again Peter Hunt, and he's the editor of Understanding Children's Literature. It's a vast, voluminous book which contains a whole lot of different approaches to children's literature. Similarly, Kimberly Reynolds and Grenby give you again an array of approaches that you can do your research through using some of these approaches. On the next slide, you also have some books which are considered seminal texts when it comes to picture books, especially Maria Nikoleva and Carol Scott's How Picture Books Work, David Lewis reading contemporary picture books, picturing text, and so on. I would like, if you could just come on audio, Ms. Sabina and Mr. Justin, if we have time, I would just like you to see the video that I have on tactile books. Otherwise, I'll stop sharing. Can you unmute yourself and just tell me?
No problem, ma'am. You can show that video.
Okay, fine. It will just take 2 minutes and just let me know if it is visible. I'm just going to the video now and just tell me if it is visible. Are you able to see this one?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, you can see it.
Okay. I'm going to just make it a little bigger. Should I put it in slideshow? Okay. I don't know if it is very visible there. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think I'll move out of the slideshow because it's come. Okay. Okay. These are some of the picture books that were made for the visually challenged. These are tactile books made by a batch of students, postgraduate students from my college here, Stella Maris College. So you can just have a look at the tactile books that they created. And I think the video ends there. I will stop sharing now and try and come back to yeah. Shall I stop presenting, Sabina, or remain on screen?
Ma'am, it would be good if you could come on screen.
Okay. You'll have to tell me if I am on screen.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
I'm sorry if I overshot the time.
No, ma'am, it's absolutely fine.
Okay, fine.
Now the stage is open for discussion. You can post your queries in the chat box. Ma'am, we have a question by Huma Dutt. Her question
Okay.
is, What can be the possible areas of research in disability studies and children's literature?
Okay. Now, like I said, if you are already reading up on disability studies, you will notice that there are books coming out in, ironically portraying the differently abled in many ways. Some of them are positive, some of them are not so positive. So you can actually do research on whether it's a positive portrayal, whether the child retains that agency. Whether the child is able to do something, to change something, either in the child's own life or in the world around. So you can look at those aspects when you look at disability studies and children's literature. But let me tell you something, that although like in Kannapanna, the visually challenged is the focus of the story in the main narrative, the actual visually challenged reader is unable to appreciate the story because the story is in written text, in printed text. So, that's the irony there. There is portrayal of the differently able. You have a book like Why Are You Afraid to Hold My Hand? It's all to do with, telling us how it feels like when you are on the other side, and how we should just be friends with them rather than sympathizing with them. So there are books and there is a lot of research that can be done via this approach.
Ma'am, there is another question. It is by Afsal M. Can you briefly explain subgenre detective fiction in children's literature?
Okay, I did not touch on detective fiction, but let me tell you now, you have, I think, many more books today. But when I was growing up, I loved reading through. I loved reading Hardy Boys. But for that matter, even if you look at Enid Blyton and you look at the mystery adventure stories, some of them are more like detective fiction for the younger child. So you have a whole lot of detective fiction there.
Ma'am, can we take two more questions?
Okay.
This is by Nimmi Stephen. Ma'am, today's children's literature is given a lot of emphasis in research in PhD.
Sorry?
Ma'am, this question is not... we have a lot of emphasis given to children's literature and research these days. Can you suggest some of the best subgenres in children's literature which we can take for research?
Okay. Now, like I mentioned, I'm a big fan of picture books. I feel there's a wealth of meaning, many layers of meaning, that if you look at a picture book, I remember when I did my PhD and somebody asked me, what's your topic? I said, children's literature. I went down a notch in their eyes. And if I said picture books, I went down 2 more notches. So, but let me tell you, composite texts are a great, are great subgenres to look at, because when there is a combination of picture and text, there can be multiple meanings. There can be many layers of meanings, and it would make for interesting research.
And this is the last question. It's by Agnes Sandosh.
Okay.
Do children's literature portray a child in reality or the author's version of a child?
I think I answered that. If you have been paying attention, I did say that it's the author's version. It's a personal and a social construct. It's not really the real child. We can't, in fact, say it's not the real child, but definitely it is the construct of the adult author.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
We have come to the close of our 6-day national webinar series on literary currents of today and tomorrow. I request the coordinator of the program, Ms. Neetu Mary Tommy, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I thank our resource person for the day, Dr. Nazneen Marshall, for explaining to us the intricacies of children's literature. That was indeed an enlightening talk. Thank you, madam. The Department of English, St. Aloysius College, Edatua, feels extremely delighted to have presented before you the national webinar series on the topic Literary Currents of Today and Tomorrow. This webinar series would not have been possible without the support and help received from many. I especially thank our principal, Dr. Jotin Joseph, and head of the department, Professor Varghese PJ, for their constant motivation and encouragement. I am grateful to our resource persons, Professor Aji George, A. Mangai, Dr. Veena Mani, Dr. Vimal John, Dr. Ganesh Krishnamurthy, and Dr. Nasneen Marshall for enlightening us on diverse topics of literary interest. Thanks are due to Ms. Ibina Thomas, Mr. Justin Thomas, and Father Tijomon Isaac for the immense help in the execution of the program. I thank all my fellow teachers at St. Aloysius College, Edathua, for all their support and cooperation. Finally, I thank all the participants of the 6 webinars who made this program a great success. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, ma'am.